In light of Pride Month, there are many companies that are, using external budgets for their marketing. And where would you say what kind of sets some companies apart from others with this kind of aspect?
So I think with Pride Month marketing, you've got two different types of marketing, right?
Yeah.
You have when a corporate is truly engaged in LGBT inclusion, and then you have one where they're engaging in sort of shouting about pride but don't necessarily do the background work. And I think consumers are becoming more and more savvy to supporting causes that they truly believe in. So a lot of people will do the background work. They'll see if you've got policies, they'll see if you have indice rankings, aspects like that to back up those commitments. And I think that's what sets it apart, is when organisations are coming from a true place of we are actually doing the work rather than just shouting about the fact that it's Pride Month.
Gotcha, makes sense. And so kind of what would you say would be kind of the biggest benefit of people actually caring about the community and actually focusing on the community rather than just kind of just the marketing aspect?
Well, I think when you work in a place that's truly inclusive, you see the benefits of it. So an inclusive culture, regardless of whether it's LGBT inclusion or any sort of inclusion of a marginalised group, when those people are sort of given the tools to really flourish in a workplace, they generally perform better, they feel more engaged with your business and brand. But also it does things like encourages people to be open about their thoughts and experiences, which kind of drives innovation in a way. And you generally get sort of the most productive output from employees working in a place that's genuinely inclusive. And I think it applies also to customers. So when they get in touch, if you've got the processes in place that support them and make them feel included, they're going to have more brand loyalty.
Yeah, of course. Now, that's interesting. So you did mention that, a lot of, organizations or employees need to feel like they're inclusive. But what would you say to kind of a lot of kind of small to medium-sized companies who they feel like they don't have anyone who's LGBT in their organization? Would you say to them that, is there any point of creating inclusive policies, or what would be your advice there?
I think it's always important to operate in the mindset that you're going to grow.
Yeah.
And for that aspect, you need to be prepared for the fact that you will be bringing on employees in the future, and they might well be LGBT. I think if you look at the census results this year, you're seeing that actually 18 to 25-year-olds are twice as likely to identify as LGBT than people who are 50 plus. So actually it's a growing trend that more and more people are part of the community. So you need to have those processes in place to welcome them and encourage them into the workplace. It also opens you up to graduates more, who will probably be more liberal in their sort of aspects and what they're looking for in a workplace. But also the last thing you want is that last minute panic when one of your colleagues comes out as transgender and you have no idea how to support them or what to do. And that's what's really important, is having policies and processes in place beforehand, so that when things do ramp up a little bit, you're ready to go and support people in the right way.
Amazing, thank you.
Lovely. So many people think already have policies in place for individuals. Why do they need to make it LGBTQ plus specific?
So I think with policies, it's great when a policy protects everybody, but actually historically they haven't. So when you look at things like bullying and harassment policies, for a very long time, actually it's been perfectly legal and the done thing to discriminate against LGBT people or people from other marginalised backgrounds. So for the longest time, organisations have had those policies in place, but they haven't necessarily protected the people that they most need the protection. So by having something like zero tolerance to homophobia, what you're really doing is strengthening those policies, so that when you do come to a place where somebody might be engaging in negative conduct towards a gay colleague, you actually have it really clear and explicit that this policy applies to particular groups, so that people know what they're entitled to.
Yeah. Nice. And are there any legal reasons why businesses need to ensure that the policies are up to date for LGBTQ plus people?
Well, yes and no. So the Equality Act 2010 provides a basic overview of what marginalised groups are entitled to. So that's all of the protected characteristics, not just LGBT people. So to an extent, you do have to make sure that when you're operating, you're in compliance to that policy. But actually, there are legal things that LGBT people are entitled to that aren't always clear. So when you look at parental leave policies, If you have two mums in a relationship, then actually you need to be able to find a way to make it really clear which one of those is covered by your maternity leave policy versus who's covered by the paternity leave policy.
And I guess, so what are some simple steps that every organisation can take to bring it forwards, make everything a little bit more inclusive for everyone?
So I think the key fundamental here is creating policies that are gender neutral by default. So I'm not talking about removing the word mother or father from a policy, but what I am saying is making it really clear who a policy applies to. And I guess the easiest way to do that in the start of all of your policies is to have a scope of the policy to explain who it covers. And then throughout the policy, you can just refer to the person in it as you or the employee, aspects like that. So it removes the gendered aspect of it. So for example, with a maternity leave policy, you can specify that the policy applies to the person who is pregnant. And that way it makes it really clear when you're in a relationship with two women, it applies solely to the woman who's pregnant. Or likewise, within menopause policies, if you have a trans person at work, they're very likely to experience the symptoms of menopause if their hormones are changed, if they stop them for a surgery. And they should really be entitled to those same sort of aspects that you would provide within a menopause policy. But with the language in it, when it's not gender neutral, often it wouldn't apply to a trans person.
Yeah, nice, thank you. It's a really interesting way of looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, everyone knows that senior leaders are very influential figures in organisations. In terms of what they can do, what do you think on your side they can actively do to sort of engage in the LGBT community in the workplace?
Yeah, so senior leaders, they're like the driving force for culture in an organisation. When you have a senior leader at the top who sets the tone of the business, it's a really powerful step to have them being open and communicating around LGBT inclusion. When you've got a senior leader who creates an atmosphere where people feel that it's okay to ask questions, to be sort of inquisitive, to talk about identities, to talk about things outside of work, it all goes to setting that culture where you bring your entire self to work. And that's kind of the most powerful aspect that a senior leader can do with regards to diversity and inclusion work, is create that atmosphere where it's okay to stand out and be yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess with that then, I guess someone in that position wouldn't want to feel like they're saying or doing the wrong thing. What would you then say, initiatives that they can do to I guess take that step forward, to make them feel more confident?
It's actually probably the most common thing that we get is senior leaders get involved when they set their organisation up, and then it grows, and then they are petrified to say the wrong thing. And it's not out of a place of ignorance, it's out of a place of wanting everybody to be able to feel included and welcome. But because of that, they kind of get inside themselves and they don't want to communicate. So I guess the most basic thing is to understand language as a senior leader. So whether that's going on some free webinars or looking at a conference, something like that, they all go to build your confidence as a senior leader. But I guess the most important thing is know that it's okay to get it wrong. Just apologise and make sure you get it right the next time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess with that, in general, what do you think can be implemented, just in regards to this, that they can pretty much contribute towards?
So I think one of the most powerful ways to get a true understanding of diversity within your own organisation is by looking at schemes like reverse mentoring. So I set this up recently, and I think it's been really powerful for an organisation I'm working with, where their senior leader is working with a marginalised junior employee, and they meet outside of work for a coffee for maybe half an hour once a month, and they just chat about this junior colleague's experiences. So what's it like answering the phone? Do people often get your pronouns right? Do you face discrimination in your customer service role? Aspects like that, where naturally different aspects of their identity come in. So it's a great way to build an understanding of LGBT inclusion, but it also takes a really nice intersectional approach for building confidence as well. And I think that's one of the best sort of schemes that businesses could look at introducing.
Definitely. In terms of their own development, their knowledge, is that something that you would recommend for themselves as well, senior leaders, for their own sort of knowledge and approach?
I think so. It builds compassion and empathy as a senior leader, because you start to understand the experiences of people that are working in your organisation. So I would really recommend that, more so to a senior leader than I actually would a junior colleague.
So I think one thing that will be kind of really important to highlight is, there is a difference between an organisation doing something, but also feeling included as part of the culture, right? So kind of, I think a lot of organisations, they do feel that, they're bringing in policies and they're trying to do things to make things a little bit, that makes people's lives a little bit easier, even if it's maybe, I don't know, having gender neutral toilets, but then after, some businesses still don't feel they might have quite an inclusive culture. So what would you say to those businesses, and what would you say is kind of necessary to have an inclusive culture?
So policies and benefits are like the fundamentals, really. And to be honest with you, in an ideal society, we wouldn't still be talking about how to make policies and benefits inclusive. And that should just be a given. So although it's a great step and a really important step to be taking, it doesn't necessarily contribute to the culture, it just contributes to the overall protections. So to really embed inclusivity into your culture, you need to be doing things like, when you do social events, making sure that they're in places that are truly inclusive. So maybe it might be a case of not always offering to go somewhere with alcohol, aspects like that. But it's also things such as having an internal comms team, or someone who manages your internal comms, who actively communicates positive messages around different diversity dates. It's by doing things like staff satisfaction monitoring and looking for where there are holes so that you can proactively fix those on a sort of ongoing basis, at least once a year. All of those start to add up, and it's when colleagues see a genuine commitment that goes beyond the basic fundamentals that they start to truly see why a culture is so inclusive.
Of course, makes sense. And what would you say to kind of organisations who are a little bit smaller and they don't necessarily think they have the time or the resources to kind of invest, or don't see the need to invest in an inclusive culture, just because they're very small?
Well, I think diversity and inclusion doesn't necessarily need to matter about size, because actually a lot of the work you do anyway. So with regards to aspects like we spoke about with the fundamentals of policies, you need them regardless. So you might as well make them inclusive whilst you do that. But I do understand that, a lot of people don't have the budgets to bring in an internal comms team or aspects like that. So that could be where you look at partnerships. So almost every county in the UK has a regional pride that is free to walk in. That's a fantastic way to demonstrate your commitment to the community, to get your colleagues involved in that sort of work. And that's just one aspect that actually is probably done outside of your normal working hours, but it doesn't take a lot of organising or planning to do. And then it's just, fundamental basics like encouraging pronouns to be used, aspects like that. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it does go a long way to build that culture, even if you're small.
Of course, makes sense. What kind of examples would you be able to kind of, real life examples would you be able to provide that, really demonstrate the power of inclusion in culture?
So through my work at Blossom, I work with 18 to 25-year-olds. So they are leaving higher education and getting to work for the first time. And I see both aspects. I see where people go and start working in a non-inclusive organisation, and they often will disengage in work. They don't really care about their work. It's a job. It's not a career or part of their life. It's just a way to earn money. But then I see the opposite side of that too. And when somebody's truly inclusive, I've seen people that leave higher education into work, and they are so in love with the organisation that they work in because they feel so valued and included that it almost becomes a bigger part of them, that they're proud to work for this organisation, that they're truly committed to it. I know firsthand there's an organisation that I started working with who were at the very early stages of their diversity and inclusion journey, and they had a real problem with sort of retaining diverse employees. Often it would be a maximum of a year that they'd last for. But by sort of doing the conscious communications, by sharing, creating that open culture, almost within that first year, they started to slow the turnover of staff down. And I think that now they actually, they're hitting their diversity and inclusion targets. They have a genuine representation in line with the census. And it just sort of shows that actually it really does make an employee's decision to stay or leave.
So kind of, what would you say is kind of the first steps that, even small steps that organisations can take just to kind of begin that journey of an inclusive culture?
You're definitely not alone in your experiences. So actually 60% of people who leave higher education go back in the closet when they go to work for the first time. That's like a huge amount of people.
Yeah.
So you're definitely not alone in that experience. I guess the first steps really start with recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about having that genuine statement in your recruitment packs that say that you value diversity and inclusion. It's having those who sit on your recruitment panels being trained on how to create inclusive recruitment cultures, so things like sharing pronouns, but also how do you create a calm atmosphere for maybe a neurodiverse person that doesn't feel comfortable in those settings. Aspects like that kind of form the first experience that somebody has in an organisation, and those are really key steps to start with.